Bonjour and welcome back. This is episode 10 of the French Revolution vlogcast, and in this episode we're going to think about the progression and end of the Terror. Last time I talked about how the Terror started, and that in July 1793 it had really kind of established itself with a changeover in the CPS, the Committee of Public Safety. Actually that changeover, which takes out Danton and the earlier members of the CPS and brings in Robespierre and characters like Saint-Just and Lazare Carnot. Actually, it works quite effectively in many ways. Saint-Just and Robespierre handle the sort of ideological side and I guess like the security side, as they would see it, of the French Republic, and they allow people like Lazare Carnot and others to work on the military, and there's sort of a twin track policy here of a mass mobilization of resources in order that the army can have what they need to fight the war successfully, and alongside that, of course, the terror policy to keep the population in check and under control. So you can see that has been a very successful thing, and that the Terror takes the Republic through a very dangerous time when at the start of it they were threatened in the Vendée, they were threatened by the Federalists, and they were threatened by armies from Austria and Prussia, and later on other countries too. However, they do undoubtedly in the autumn of 1793 accelerate the Terror, and it's really at that point where you can see the amount of people who have been killed in the Terror, just really stepping up from the hundreds and into the thousands. And partly that's helped by the law of suspects, which is passed in September 1793, which essentially says that if we suspect you of being against the Terror, perhaps because you don't seem very enthusiastic about the Republic, then you are in a lot of trouble. Increasingly, a movement starts against the Terror in that autumn, and that's because actually some of the main things that some of the main reasons that it was brought in begin to be overcome. So, for instance, in September, the British are stopped in their advance. In October, the Austrians are defeated, and also the internal enemies begin to be stopped as well. On the 9th of October, Lyon is liberated from the Federalists. It actually becomes then called Liberty Town, or Ville Affranchie. Affranchie is Affranchie. Over 1,900 people are executed in Lyon under the supervision of Collot d'Herbois. Likewise, Marseille is liberated, and that becomes Ville Saint-Nom, the town with no name. There, in fact, 900 people are put on trial, 412 are executed, which suggests that 563 were acquitted. And actually, it's a good point to say here that in the Terror, 90% of the executions that occur happen in 20 out of the 86 départements, and that all of those except Paris were war zones, either war zones in the Vendée region, or war zones being affected by Federalists, or war zones affected by the War of the First Coalition. So the Terror is quite focused, even if it is quite brutal. Anyway, however, in the autumn 1793, people begin to say, well, the Terror could probably wind down now because the main threats to the French Republic have been overcome. And these people are called the indulgences, and they're led by Danton and Desmoulins and Fabre d'Eglantine. And they are opposed initially by Hebert and the Hebertists, but there is certainly an attractiveness to what they're saying, and it has been suggested that the law of Frimaire, which was passed in December 1793, the law of Frimaire's intention was to purge, or to allow for the purge of local officials. It has been suggested that actually that purge was not to push in more Jacobin terror exponents, but actually to pull back from the anarchy and to establish more central control, and that Robespierre himself was becoming concerned particularly with elements of the Terror like de-Christianization. And that maybe at that point Robespierre was wavering into pulling back the Terror and siding with the indulgence. The turning point away from that policy seems to have been the return to Paris of Collot d'Herbois from Lyon, who was very big on de-Christianisation and quite vicious in his pursuit of the terror, and also the discovery of quite a lot of corruption within the indulgence politicians. Fabre d'Églantine was exposed as being quite corrupt, and Danton himself had made money out of the revolution. And so Robespierre acts against the indulgence in a very personal way, and this is one of the things that undermines his credibility. At the trial of Danton and de Moulins, evidence is used against them which Robespierre had taken from personal writings, and that is seen as being really a sign that nobody was safe if he was willing to move against these previous friends and allies of his. In fact, Robespierre went to school with de Moulins. And so Robespierre's other move to try and water down, dilute the terror, instead becomes the creation of the Supreme Being and the Festival of the Supreme Being. But that is widely ridiculed, and the Jacobins start to fracture at this point. Collot d'Herbois doesn't like it because it seems to be reintroducing religion. He's the big de-Christianizer and the atheist amongst the, or the most prominent atheist amongst the Republicans. And people like Lazacarno find it a bit silly and self-righteous. And so Robespierre begins to lose credibility and support at this point. Around this time, again, there becomes a renewed perceived need for the terror because of failed assassination attempts on Carnot and also on Robespierre, and that brings in the law of prairial, which says that you don't need witnesses, you don't need a jury, you don't need counsel. All the judge needs to decide is whether they're innocent or guilty, whether they're going to be guilty, and that's the only punishment is being guillotined. And so the amount of executions just continues apace because the justice system is channeled ever more efficiently and effectively towards guillotining. Against that, the military continues to be very successful. The Battle of Fleurus is won in June, and that finally defeats Austria and lays open the Austrian Netherlands once again to the French Republic. And Robespierre continues to make himself more unpopular by establishing in April 1794 a new police bureau that will report to him and the Committee of Public Safety, and Saint-Just is in on that as well. Because of this, then, the fracturing of the Committee of Public Safety itself, Carnot and Collot, for different reasons, being increasingly suspicious and dissatisfied with Robespierre, the Police Bureau and the Festival of the Supreme Being, because of the success of the military removing the need for the terror, and because of the wider and wider net that the terror seems to be spreading, support for Robespierre begins to leak away. And when Robespierre starts to criticise Collot publicly and other people who have perhaps been over-enthusiastic in the terror, people like Fouché, they also begin to think, actually, we need to remove Robespierre because he is a problem for us, and we might end up being victims of the terror rather than instigators of it. The final sort of piece of that jigsaw is that the sans-culottes start to become dissatisfied with the way the country is being run. 1794, you won't be surprised to learn, pardon me, there is a bad harvest and again another harsh winter, and because the Committee of Public Safety had removed the price controls that they'd put in place, and that leads to higher prices and dissatisfaction amongst the sans-culottes, a lot of hunger and deaths from starvation amongst the sans-culottes. And what that means is that actually they are no longer so in favour of the terror. There's no sort of such an immediate fear for them because the war has been fought to a successful seeming conclusion. And what they want now is food. And Robespierre, just continuing on with the terror, seems to be against that policy. So when in July Robespierre stands up in the convention and says, I've got a list here of names of people that are betraying the Republic, and if you're worried, if you're sitting there and you're concerned about whether your name is on my list, Well, you should be, because that suggests that in your heart you are capable of betraying the revolution. And of course, everyone is scared because everyone knows that the justice of the terror is actually pretty arbitrary, and the accusation can now be levelled against pretty much anyone. And so it's in that context that people have already for quite a while there's been the suggestion that it's no longer necessary. There's been the suggestion that Robespierre has overstepped his authority, and there's also the suggestion that there are higher priorities now in the economy. At that point, these forces come together, Robespierre's support leaks away, and the coup of Thermidor removes him and ends the terror finally in July 1794. I hope that's helpful. Thanks for listening. See you next time.